Hello, everyone. It's Adrienne Rivera with the Breath of Gold Festival. We are super excited to have you back. I'm here with Katie Rose, who is a breathwork facilitator. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So share with us a little bit about the work that you do and your background.
Sure. Well, I'm a yoga teacher and an Ayurvedic practitioner, and I've been working in the realm of birth work, pregnancy, and pre and postnatal care for over 20 years now. I also practice as a doula, which is a childbirth support person. Um, and I've got 5 children of my own. So I've had a little bit of experience of birthing babies and using breathwork to support the journey of pregnancy and then the postnatal time and of course the labor itself as well.
So good. I love this so much. And I know this is such a hot topic. It's been wanted to go deeper in. People have been asking for this. So share with us first and foremost, because I know breathwork is contraindicated for pregnant women, depending on the style. And so I'd love to hear your philosophy on what styles work well for women when they're pregnant and which ones to steer away from.
Sure. Well, I mean, the thing about pregnancy and breath work, also yoga, asana, so many other things, diet, etc., is you'll find lots of different opinions out there. So, if you do a Google search or you start chatting to practitioners, many people will have different opinions. So I'll just say that to start off with. I can share my personal experience and my journey and what my research has taught me and, experience of teaching for a couple of decades. But a really valuable guide is to listen to your own body, and to really be engaged with the biofeedback that you're getting from your body. So I'll say that to start with. In terms of what's not recommended, it's really in pregnancy, there is so much change happening in the body. Like, you're going through a huge metamorphosis. Your body is building another human. I mean, it's just the most incredible thing to even contemplate. And when we think about what the purpose of breath work is when we're not pregnant, what I would say from a kind of yoga perspective is really what we're interested in when we're doing breath work is we're interested in changing the energy body. That's what we're really working with. We're working with what in yoga and Sanskrit we'd call pranamaya kosha, which is the layer of the energy body. And the breath has a direct interaction between physical body and energy body. Now, when you're pregnant, you're not really so interested in working with that energetic framework because there's already so much going on. Like I just said, you're building a human. So actually, I become interested in breath work more as a way of interacting with mood, state of mind, resilience, and even physical body recalibration, like nervous system recalibration. So it's always useful to look first at the purpose, like what is the purpose of the practice? And I think in pregnancy and in labor itself, like in the birthing space, we're really interested in dropping into the physical body, regulating the nervous system. It's not so much about getting that kind of like high experience or energy body changing experience. So the first thing I would say is during pregnancy, during childbirth, you want to look at not shocking the body. So practices like breath of fire or Kapalabhati or anything where we're creating like a hyperventilation state are not recommended because they create shock in the body. In the same way, I mean, I'll just give you another example. There's a real kind of trend at the moment for ice bathing and, the cold water immersion. That works in a very similar way on the nervous system as some of the breathwork practices. It creates a lot of energy, a heightened awareness, like a high. It's super powerful. I wouldn't recommend it in pregnancy. I don't think that during that time we want to be creating those shocks in the energy body. We actually want to be really soothing and nurturing and creating a very even playing field. So I don't recommend practices like Kapalabhati or breath of fire, anything where the diaphragm is really flapping very fast, where the diaphragm is being asked to move very quickly, creates a lot of tension in the body when you're pregnant because your uterus is expanding. You're housing a mini human, and it creates conflict when the diaphragm starts pressing down on the belly and the baby that's lifting up. So, I mean, apart from anything else, in pregnancy, our lung capacity is radically reduced. at the end, you're going to be down to a third of your normal capacity, which is why pregnant women get so breathless, just walking up a flight of stairs, because we're actually working on a lower lung capacity. So it's all about gentle, soothing, recalibrating nervous system, and not doing anything that's going to create a lot of tension or shock or looking for that kind of more extraordinary experience. We really want to be staying in a very safe realm.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm of the same philosophy as you, and the longer sessions like circular connected, holotropic, 3-part, my take on it is that sympathetic fight or flight state may send those stress hormones to the baby, which might be, preparing it for a dangerous world to come out into. It thinks, oh man, there's a lot of cortisol, this must be a really dangerous place. Are there lions and bears right out of the womb? What's going on? So I'm of a similar philosophy as you. And so what breathwork techniques do you recommend that are more parasympathetic, rest and digest, and nourishing for the mother during her pregnancy?
Yeah, great question. So, first of all, what I'm teaching and practicing during the pregnancy is what we're going to also bring into the birth space. So I think one of the things that pregnant women often do is they think, oh, I need to learn techniques ready for when I'm birthing my baby, when I'm in the actual physical act of labor. And really what we need to do is we need to train the cellular memory for those moments, because when you're birthing a baby, it's a full-on whole body experience. And if you're trying to do a technique that's complicated or that you haven't really fully embodied because you haven't practiced it a lot, then it'll probably go out the window. Like there'll just be too much other stuff going on in your mind and in your environment, and it'll be easy to kind of not engage and anchor into that. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I have is practice in your pregnancy, so that the practices, the breath work is automatic. It's what you naturally do when you feel under pressure, when you feel overwhelmed, when you feel some kind of stress. And when you go into the birthing space and that pressure and that overwhelm start to mount, you naturally come back to that pacifying breath work, because it's in you, it's in your cellular memory. You're not having to think, oh, what am I meant to be doing now? What's the breathwork technique? No, it's like, it's there. It's part of who you are. So that's the first thing. Little and often, regular practice, like, a few times a day, just for a few minutes, so that the body remembers. The best breathwork practice in pregnancy and in the labor room itself is the most simple practice in the whole entire world. And it's just literally extension of the exhalation. Like, we want to make sure that the out breath is longer than the in breath. And it is literally that simple. If we get into counting and complicated techniques and retention and all these kind of, like, again, in the labor room, under pressure, when it's all happening and you're transitioning and you're pushing a baby out of the womb, you're not going to remember any of that stuff. It falls by the wayside. So we need to keep it ultra simple. One of the techniques I love to teach women is how to use sound in relationship to breath work. So very often, like if we look at animals, for example, mammals in the wild, when they birth a baby, you look at a cow or you look at a sheep or a dog, how they birth. What they do is they go into a very private, warm, dark space that feels safe. And, already we're kind of in trouble with that, because most of us birth our babies in hospitals, which are not private, dark, warm, and safe. So we're already kind of a little bit on guard. But let's say those conditions are correct. What a mammal will do in its natural state is it will make long, loud, lowing noises. So like if you watch a cow birthing, the kind of noise, it sounds like an om, sounds like the om sound. You'll hear like a oh, oh, and the baby will birth to that kind of sound. And almost all mammals do it. So I think there's some really interesting clues there. It's like, if that's what biologically and naturally a mammal is inclined to do in birthing its babies, we are, as humans, we're also mammals. There's some evidence there, there's some clues there in the natural world that are showing us what's the optimum methodology, if you like. And what these mammals are doing actually is they're self-regulating their nervous system by extending the exhalation and using sound to get really anchored into the earthing energy that is needed for the baby to come out. Now, when it goes wrong, when it gets derailed, what starts to happen is the inhale becomes longer than the exhale. So instead of this oh experience, it's and we're like holding and holding and holding, and it's like a panic is rising in the body. All the energy rises up, and this is how a lot of women, this is the state that a lot of women get into in the birthing room. The energy rises up, and then we create again a conflict in the body, because what we actually want the energy to do is eject down. We've got to be, it's a apana vayu, it's the downward moving energy. We've got to be connected to earth to birth a baby. So all the energy we need to be working on, exhale, long exhale, bring the energy down. When we panic, the energy comes up, and then this is when women start to have their cervix not dilate, labor gets really extended, pain increases, and the whole birth will often get derailed at that point and end up with a lot of interventions. So one of the things that we can do so beautifully, and if you're supporting someone birthing, whether you're the partner or, you know, a doula or a good midwife, even an obstetrician, is encourage that long, low sound. And when the sound gets hysterical and high pitched, screaming and that kind of experience, we can actually practice that sound work. And the sound work is so closely linked to the breath. Because again, we might not remember how to work with the breath, but when you're doing that very long and low sounding, you're automatically extending into a long exhalation.
I love this. And this makes so much sense. And anytime we have that sound, we're also activating the vagus nerve. And so I'm sure that that plays a role into it as well. And yeah, having that sound, you just stop exhaling when the sound is complete. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to count. I love your approach to making this super practical. And one of the things that you mentioned is that anything super complicated, like counting or things that people may have read about, that'll probably go out the window. So how do you recommend that your clients practice this? Like, what's a good protocol for a pregnant woman? At what stage in her pregnancy should she begin? How often should she practice this? And what does that look like?
Yeah. So like I said, little and often is the key. You don't want to sit and do a half an hour practice once a week or twice a week, because it won't get ingrained in your cellular memory in the same way. You really want to be doing 3 to 5 minutes of practice once or twice a day. And in pregnancy, I mean, it can get a little bit complicated, but if we look at pregnancy from an Ayurvedic perspective, what we're really wanting to do with the energy body is connect to earth. It's all about earth. Pregnant women tend towards feeling a little bit anxious and a little bit overwhelmed because it's a new experience, especially for first-time mums. And our medical system and our hospital systems aren't great at supporting us to not have that feeling of overwhelm and anxiety. We focus on statistics of what can go wrong for a start. So these practices of not just the breath work, but also the anchoring and connecting to earth are such medicine. They're such powerful remedy for the anxiety, for the overwhelm, for the heightened feeling outside of your comfort zone. So I recommend a couple of times a day at least for a short and sweet practice, 3 to 5 minutes. And honestly, the practice that I recommend my clients do and that I've done in my pregnancies is that long, lowing sound. So you can think of it as the mantra Om, if that's helpful to you, or you can just think of it as sounding. But really what you're attempting to do is get that exhale to be as long as you possibly can. You really want it to be extended, and you want it to be low and deep, nothing high pitched, nothing that sounds kind of hysterical. Another element that's really important to keep in mind in pregnancy is I don't recommend breath retention. When you're pregnant, you are breathing for your unborn baby. You know, your oxygen supply is their oxygen supply via the placenta. And I mean, this is a little bit of a, I don't recommend doing this as an experiment, but I can tell you in my own pregnancies, you know, I've had 5 children. I've done a little experiment when I've had ultrasounds and I've had the baby, you know, the fetal, view on the ultrasound where I'll hold my breath just as a like cheeky experiment. Again, I don't recommend it, but you can see within a few seconds of breath retention, the baby starts to like move and twitch, and basically the baby's saying, where's my oxygen supply gone? Like I can feel that my oxygen supply is diminished almost instantly, like 5 to 10 seconds that will start to happen. Now, of course, we know the blood supply in the placenta means that the baby will get a lot more oxygen, like it will go a lot longer. But there's a sensitivity there. The baby is really connected to the mother's breath. So if mother isn't breathing deeply, isn't really engaging a full oxygen supply, isn't utilizing full capacity of the lungs, actually the baby can feel that. And there's a feeling of kind of like a deprivation or a, there's not enough nourishment here, not just the physical nourishment coming in through the nutrients, but the breath, the life force of the prana. So yeah, that's another tip in pregnancy. I definitely recommend not practicing any breath retentions for that reason.
Mm-hmm. I love this. So 3 to 5 minutes twice a day, oming, sounding. And is that during the whole pregnancy or just the later phases?
Like as much as you can do, the more the better, because what we're really doing is training our cellular memory in the time of crisis to remember, to go into that space. And the only way that you do that is through regular habit building, conscious repetition. And I would also say, particularly come to that practice, that breath work practice and that sounding practice when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, when you're feeling like things are spiraling a little bit, you're getting a little bit stuck in your head, you're overthinking, there's some anxiety. That's the time to practice it, because that's what you're going to be faced with probably in the labor room. So by training your body into that nervous system relaxation in that anxious, heightened moment, that tool will then translate very sweetly into the labor space.
Mm-hmm. And what about a woman who's wanting to do breath work while pregnant for her own personal things going on? Like, let's say she's feeling not that confident and it's her first time being a mother and she's a little bit nervous, or something happens in her life and she's wanting that energetic shift that breath work used to give her. And while those more intense, longer styles of breath work are then temporarily on pause, are there other styles of breath work that you recommend for pregnant women besides just this one to get ready to actually be in labor?
Yeah. The other one that I teach a lot, and I really like to, there's two. So one is the 3-part breath, or the real deepening of the breath. So in other words, engaging full capacity of the lungs. Like I said before, as the diaphragm lifts because the baby gets bigger, lung capacity is reduced, which can leave women often feeling quite anxious because we feel like we're short of breath, which isn't a good feeling. So practicing really using the diaphragm, making sure that the diaphragm is nice and elastic and soft and malleable and not becoming rigid and like too tight, is a really beautiful practice. And the way I teach that is very, very simple. It's expanding through the belly, expanding through the chest, expanding into the throat and through the collarbone. So there's 3 kind of parts to the way that we feel into that expansion, and then releasing from belly through ribs, through chest. So in other words, just long, deep breathing. The other practice that I really like, and I've seen to be very effective for pregnant women, is breathing just through the left nostril. So, we have the practice of Nadi Shodhana or Anuloma Viloma, which is where we're alternating the nostrils. And many people will be familiar with alternate nostril breathing, which is a beautiful practice for anxiety and stabilizing the nervous system and balancing left brain and right brain. However, in pregnancy, actually, what we're really wanting to do is we're wanting to come into the more receptive, more feminine, more, even I want to say devotional space. And the way that we can do that is by activating the Ida Nadi, which is the channel that ends at the left nostril. So by blocking off the right and purely breathing in and out long and slow through left nostril, it's a very beautiful practice for calming nervous system, but particularly bringing us into feminine energy. And again, this can be really useful. Like, for example, if you're having lots of medical appointments, if you're having to spend quite a bit of time in the hospital, which many pregnant women are, and they're recommending a lot of interventions, for example, and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by that, and you want to come back to your own intuition and the trust that you have in your own body and your own capacity to build and birth a beautiful, healthy baby, left nostril breathing is really useful for that, for the self-trust in the divine feminine piece.
I love that as an invitation, especially with the left side of the body being the feminine, energetic side. So that makes a lot of sense. And I know for a lot of people listening, we are familiar with 3-part breath as a more intense style. So that's more like, and this one is more of like yogic breathing, where it's just slowly feeling the inhale move in the body and then slowly out, and it's in and out through the nose, correct?
Correct. So yes, we're not taking that brief pause in between the 3 parts, because that kind of amplifies the intensity, which there's a beautiful place for that, but probably not in pregnancy. It's more of a, smooth, fluid flow through, and then in and out through the nose, or optional to be out through the mouth, because actually the out through the mouth is the extension of the exhale part that allows us to do that real letting go. So mostly in yoga tradition, we don't breathe out through the mouth. We work mostly in and out through the nose. But in pregnancy and labor, I quite often teach out through the mouth, because it just allows more of a release, which is really what we're looking for.
I love that. Yes. Thank you for explaining. And how quickly after they deliver the baby can they go back to the more intense 3-part breath, or holotropic or circular connected, Kalabati? My thought is right after. However, the question that I have for you is, when we do those states of breath work and we are putting our body in a stress response in a safe way to release things like trauma and heal, I'm curious if that can go into like the breast milk, or if there's a certain period of time after having the baby that the baby is still very much sensing what the mom is doing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm so glad that you asked. My perspective on that is we take what's known as a 40-day sacred pause after the birth. So for 40 days, and this is actually recommended in many of the yogic scriptures, like there's a lot of yogic science behind this. For 40 days after giving birth, we're in a sacred pause. We're in a bonding experience between mother and baby, and we're in a recovery phase. And so everything in that bubble of the first 40 days needs to be very gentle, very a softness. We're still in that divine feminine portal. So we really don't want to be working with the shocks and the stresses and the cortisol as a method of trauma release. We're not there yet. We're still in that sacred pause, that softening. After the 40 days, an emerging starts to take place, a physical emerging, where mother and baby are ready to like go out and be in the world and meet people and kind of starting to reintegrate back into life. And also an emerging out of the birthing portal and a reflection. Now, hopefully the birth was a positive experience. And then in that emerging, we can go back to the practices that we were loving and enjoying beforehand, and kind of continue on as we were. If there's been some trauma during the birth, or if the birth has been difficult and there's a bit of a recovery process that needs to happen, then we would look at a slow and a gradual reintegration. So we don't want to kind of come in like a bull in a china shop and like really blitz into dealing with the trauma. There's still a lot of sensitivity there. There's a heightened sensitivity. So a period of reintegration is required. And I would say also another thing to consider is physically, depends how many babies you've had, how fit and well you are. But in the first 40 days, there's a reorganization of the internal organs, the diaphragm. Everything has to drop back down again because it's all been squished right up. And it takes a little bit of time. Pelvic floor, diaphragm, the bandhas, even if we want to talk energetically, to just reorganize and recalibrate themselves. And that 40-day window of a very gentle approach allows for that to happen before we then start with breath work that might be a little bit anatomically more taxing on a body that is still, like, literally the internal organs are still descending and reorganizing back to the position. The uterus is contracting back down.
That makes a lot of sense. And I know for the more intense styles of breath work, it's contraindicated to have like, recent surgeries and then do breath work, because we wouldn't want stitches to open up. So that makes me think, like, if the woman had a C-section, then probably a little bit of extra time really having that healing process would make a lot of sense. And you mentioned that the diaphragm has to come down and readjust. Are there any exercises that you recommend for people to help that process?
Yeah. Before I go into that, I'll just say also, you know, there's a real cultural thing in our society at this particular time where we're in a rush to get back to how things were before. You know, a lot of women, it will be like, when can I go back to my yoga practice? When can I go back to the gym? When can I go back to my breathwork practice? And I just will say, as a mother of 5 children and someone who has supported women birthing, you know, many, many births, you'll never get to go back to how things were before. Like, you have been through a portal and you will come out of that portal a changed human. So this attachment to when can I get back into how it was before, I think that's a very, it can be a very damaging narrative for women. Your body will be forever changed. Your mindset will be forever changed. There's so many recalibrations, and that I think a more potent question for women to ask themselves as they emerge into motherhood, again, especially for the first time, is how can I use the breath work? How can I use my spiritual practices? How can I use the tools that I have to work through this huge, enormous transition? How can I be most supported in transition? And breath work is nothing if not the practice of working through transitions. I mean, every inhale and exhale is a transition. The first thing that we do when we come into this life is to inhale, invite prana into the body. And the very last thing that we will do when we die, when we leave this body, is the exhalation. And all the breaths that happen in between are the transitions of our lives. We're moving through transition all the time. So I'm very interested in how the breath work can support that physical, emotional, spiritual transition that we go through when we become new mums, new mothers. Going back to your question about the diaphragm, actually, the body has so much innate wisdom. When we start getting too focused on what we think we need to do, we often create more problems than we solve. So for example, pelvic floor, a lot of women will think, oh, I have to start doing Kegel exercises or Mula Bandha or lifting up through the pelvic floor immediately after I've given birth, because I don't want to have, you know, incontinence or prolapsed womb or any of those potential complications. And the truth is, your body, if you're fairly fit and well and robust, your body knows exactly what to do. And really what you need to do is sacred pause, rest, and leave it alone. Don't get too involved. You don't need to play God and think that you know how to fix everything up. Just let your body in its infinite wisdom recalibrate, sort itself out. Don't be in a hurry. I mean, I remember, this is like a personal kind of intimate detail, but I remember after I had my 5th baby, which was not that long ago, she's only 1.5 now. It took my pelvic floor quite a long time to recover because I'd had so many babies. It was my 5th baby and I've had vaginal deliveries with all of them. And there was a point at which I was like, God, am I going to be a little bit incontinent all the time now? Like, is this the new normal that I'm like, every time I cough or sneeze, a little bit of pee comes out? And I just needed to be more patient. After 5, 6, 7 weeks, the pelvic floor rebalanced. I was able to start gentle Mula Bandha practices, and I don't have any incontinence problems. I've got a strong pelvic floor now, but it took a little bit longer. It just required a little bit of patience. And often we get to a week postnatal, 2 weeks postnatal, and we're like, why hasn't my tummy gone down yet? Why am I still feeling so heavy? Why am I still bleeding? You know, and it's just, you're in transition. It takes time, slowly, patient. Your body is amazing. It knows exactly how to birth the baby. It knows exactly how to recover. Again, I look at mammals in the wild and I think they have their babies, they get up, they start walking around straight away. They're incredibly resilient, and we can learn a lot from watching that model.
Yes, thank you for sharing that story and just like normalizing what that's like. And, you know, after having 5 babies, that makes sense. For me, I've never had a baby, but what I have heard, and I'm curious your take on this, is I've heard that in the world of fitness, like depending on where your body is used to, I've heard people recommend like, well, if your body's used to running every day, it can do that in pregnancy. But if your body's not used to running, don't start anything new. But in my opinion, like running or swimming, those are in a way form of breath work, right? We're breathing differently. So any thoughts on how breathing in swimming or running would affect the baby?
Actually, I completely agree with what you've just said, that it's about what you're coming from and what you're moving into. So if you've got an existing breathwork practice, an existing swimming practice, running practice, you regularly go to the gym, I mean, you're going to need to make some modifications for physical safety, but if your body is fine-tuned to have that capacity and have that practice, you're probably going to be fine in pregnancy. What pregnancy is not a time for is starting something radical and new. And a lot of women do this because they're like, oh God, I'm pregnant. Okay, I want to do the right thing by the baby. I'm going to start breath work. I'm going to start yoga. I'm going to start running because I want to be fit and well. Actually, in pregnancy, it's a time to just, okay, I've come in with this, and this is what I'm going to work with now for the next 9 months. It's not a time for radical change. And one of the things I often say to women who are thinking of having a baby is do your prep work before you even get pregnant. That's a really critical window. You want to get fit and flexible and strong and robust in your immune system and robust in your relationship to your breath before the pregnancy, because once you're pregnant, you'll be drawing on the investment that you've made prior to becoming pregnant. When you're pregnant, it's a little bit harder. You really just actually in a kind of holding pattern. Like I said before, there's enough going on. Your body's making a baby. It's not ready to start running and swimming and doing all these new things. It's like, hang on a minute, I'm trying to build a human over here. There's already enough happening.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that perspective. And is there anything else that you think is important for anyone who is currently pregnant or is planning to become pregnant soon?
Look, there are so many things I could say, but the number one thing I'll say is trust yourself. Trust yourself. There are so many messages. There are so many voices. There are so many opinions from, you know, your mother to your partner, to your obstetrician, to your midwife, to something I said, to something you saw on Google. Like there are a million voices. And the journey of moving into parenting from conception through to parenting teenagers is a journey of self-trust. So when in doubt, go inside, self-inquiry, follow your intuition, self-trust. If you feel like something is the right path for you, it probably is. And if you have a strong intuition, and this happens a lot in the medical system, of like, this is not right, something's not right, either in your body or with the advice you're being given, honor that and listen to it. That's the strongest piece of advice I can give a pregnant woman.
Thank you for that. And last thing is your free gift, which is your yoga book. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I wrote a book called Yoga of Birth. It's been in print for 10 years now. I'm amazed at how popular it's been. Like it's really been, so many women write to me and tell me how helpful it's been for their pregnancy journey. It goes all the way from preconception through to that 40-day sacred pause that I spoke about, and gives many different techniques around breath work, around asana, around sleep, managing anxiety, nutrition, Ayurveda. Like there's a lot in there. And I'm gifting that book in PDF form to anyone that's listening and part of the festival.
Amazing. We'll make sure that that's linked right below this video. And I see here that it's bhaktirose.com.au/free book. So
That's
we've
it.
got that. Yes.
Yes.
Amazing. Thank you. This has been so valuable.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure for me to talk about this subject. Yeah, thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Bye.